Today's episode is brought to you by Mazars. SoundCartel. Do you feel constantly overwhelmed and exhausted? You may well be burnt out. And you wouldn't be alone. In fact, Australians have one of the highest rates of burnout in the world. From SoundCartel, I'm Nicole Goodman, and this is Business Essentials Daily. Almost 4 in 5 of us have reported feeling some element of burnout. That's according to Mark Butler, a specialist in workplace mental health. Mark has 14 years clinical psychotherapy experience, underpinned by 25 years in the commercial sector. Shortly, Mark explains how to prevent burnout and what to look out for if you or your team are suffering. First, Chris Ashmore asks Mark whether COVID has exacerbated burnout in the workplace.
Absolutely it has, Chris. We had to pivot very, very quickly. And I think, we started with maybe 7% of people who were working from home to over 90% literally overnight. And we've had to work very, very hard across every industry, and professionals are no different, of course, to manage the business as best we can in uncertain circumstances. And that does lead out to burnout. Yeah, it certainly does.
What is burnout exactly?
People often think it's exhaustion, and it is part of it. And exhaustion speaks to mental exhaustion, physical exhaustion, or even emotional exhaustion. But that's only one part of burnout. There are sort of 3 parts of burnout. One would, of course, be exhaustion. Another one would be what they call efficacy in the sort of literature. And by efficacy, they mean sort of ability to do our job. And so we're talking brain fog. My experience was I've forgotten names of people I worked very closely with on a daily basis. Other people forget to spell. People forget to be able to do simple arithmetic, etc. So we get that sort of brain fog. The third element of burnout is something that is known as cynicism. And by that it is when your people or you find yourself speaking disparagingly about the organization or about your leaders or about your team, or it gets really dangerous when they start speaking disparagingly or badly about your customers. So cynicism is the one I like to focus on a lot because for a couple of reasons. It can be the first time that you'll recognize burnout in somebody is when you'll see that in someone else. You'll hear the gossip in the office, etc. And the reason people focus in on that, there's 2 main reasons. They become cynical and speaking disparagingly or talking everything down because they're in that burnout space. And they don't like being there on their own. We're a social animal. So we'll try to recruit somebody else into that space with us. That's the first thing. And the second reason is it's a way of validating what our feelings or what our experience is. So those are the 3 main areas of burnout. Exhaustion, absolutely. Cynicism, yes. And it's contagious in a team. You've got to nip it in the bud.
So what triggers burnout then? Is it simply so much work to do in little time, or is it other things?
Well, it's interesting. Jennifer Moss in Harvard Business Review, I think 2019, said workplace-related burnout is an organizational problem, not a people problem. I'm paraphrasing there, but that's essentially what she's saying is it's kind of work design, it's workload, etc., is the trigger. Every single one of us is a breaking point. If we're under enough pressure or stress for long enough, we will all experience a breaking point. So we can't say it's a person issue or a weakness or a failing. It is a circumstantial issue. So it's a bit like the canary in a cage down the coal mine. The canary will collapse if there's a toxic environment. And we can't keep looking for stronger canaries to send down the coal mine. We have to look at work design and workload for individuals. An antidote, I think, to burnout, a very useful one is this whole idea of autonomy and some sense of control in how we do our work. And if that is an antidote to burnout, then it probably tells us when we don't have a sense of autonomy or control in how we do our work and what we do, then we're just kind of hamsters on the wheel, or we're plucking chickens and we just, it's a laborious task that we don't have much control over, and that can lead to burnout.
Interested in startup culture or an entrepreneur yourself, perhaps? Then you will love The History of the Australian Startup Ecosystem, a new podcast series that examines the rich history of Australian startups. Be inspired by guests like Tim Fung, founder of Airtasker, Daniel Flynn, founder of Thank You, Cameron Adams, co-founder of Canva, and the founders of VCs, Blackbird and Square Peg. Follow The History of the Australian Startup Ecosystem wherever you listen to podcasts. The link is also in the show notes of this episode.
And what are the long-term consequences of burnout?
If you've burnt out once, you are susceptible to burnout sooner again, because it starts to involve and immerse itself in sort of affect disorders like depression and anxiety, and mood sort of changing disorders like that. Perfectionism can start to creep in, which again is just a form of anxiety. So the long-term consequences of burnout are challenging mental health issues and inability to do one's work, and have to probably leave certainly the role, probably the company, and possibly the sort of industry that you're in as well. Lots of organizations during COVID gave the entire business a week off to recover from burnout. And it was an absolute waste of time and money, because the people who weren't burned out spent the week relaxing and catching up and having a break. Now, that was deserved and earned. That's fine. But then they came back to work, and now, we're playing catch up for end of quarter and end of year results, which weren't affected or weren't amended as a result of everyone taking some time off. But the people who needed the break the most, the ones who were burnt out, spent the time catching up and trying to get ahead and trying to get on top of everything again. So didn't get a break. And so it didn't actually resolve any of their issues. And taking a week off isn't going to do anything. Yeah.
Well, finally, if anyone is listening and is feeling burnt out, Mark, any advice? What first steps should they do?
Make sure that one is eating right. One of the first steps we can take when we're stressed out and we're anxious in a role is we start to skip meals. Because if we're not feeding the beast, it's not going to go anywhere. And the problem with skipping meals is the sort of brain chemicals that help us to combat the levels of stress that can lead to burnout. Things like dopamine and serotonin. We've all heard the names. We now know that they're not actually mostly created in the brain. They're actually developed in the gut. And therefore, they're developed in the gut through, proper nutrition. So if we're skipping meals, we're not providing the chemicals in our brain that will help us to combat stress. And we have to find our energy from somewhere else. And that's usually adrenaline and cortisol and nervous energy. And that's a short-term response, because when we do that, we have adrenaline and cortisol coursing through our bodies that we don't burn off necessarily, and that leads to inflammation and cardiovascular diseases, etc. But it also pulls blood from the digestive system so that it does provide the energy as if we're in a fight or flight response. So if we're getting our energy from that, it's short term, and the long-term harms are huge. And so first steps then are sleep, diet, exercise, mindset, rest. We need to be taking care of our own sort of ecosystem, if you like. If the work is overwhelming us and we're becoming overloaded, if we don't deal with it, then we're not any use to our business and we're not any use to our people. So we need to look at the workload we've got, perhaps delegate wherever we need to, perhaps look at manpower, even on a short-term basis, but we need to alleviate the pressure. So it's very, very important. You can be the canary in the cage down the coal mine. We can't keep looking for stronger canaries. Sometimes you just got to look at the coal mine itself and see what the toxic environment is.
That was Mark Butler, workplace mental health specialist. This episode of Business Essentials Daily is produced by the team at SoundCartel. Thanks for listening. I'm Nicole Goodman. We'll bring you more Be Daily tomorrow. Follow at BE Daily Podcast across social media and head to bedaily.com.au for more from the Business Essentials Daily podcast. SoundCartel. This episode was brought to you by Mazars. To find out more, visit mazars.com.au. That's mazars.com.au.